Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's Sequin Inspire Talk, Inspire, our Inspire lecture series, Introduction to Neuroscientists Succeeding and Progressing with Innovative Research Endeavors. Today, we're so honored to have Dr. Estevana Isaac-Nyamwaro. She's an assistant professor of neurology and clinical director of cognitive disorders at the University of Pittsburgh. She's a board certified and fellowship trained cognitive and behavioral neurologist and a clinical researcher. Her clinical research focuses on comparative effectiveness, analysis of different interventions and strategies implemented in real-world settings, as well as clinical trials addressing pharmacologic management of neurocognitive and neuropsychiatric symptoms due to neurodegenerative disorders, including Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, and frontotemporal dementia, as well as non-neurodegenerative etiologies such as vascular disease. She uses principles from community engagement research, including mutual respect and equitable collaboration, to help build trust and increase participation in the local communities she serves. Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac, for coming today, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. And I appreciate you guys having me. I'm happy to be here. So basically, this talk today is going to be on expanding your perspective as a scientist through community engaged research. Um, and I'm a cognitive and behavioral neurologist at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm also assistant professor of neurology. And like I said, I'm excited to be here. And I'm going to start this talk with just going over the objectives. So, with this talk, I'm hoping to explore. So, basically, we want to explore your passion for pursuing brain health equity research. And then we're going to talk about building skills and acumen to conduct high quality research. And then, how is it to fuse your passion and skills in academic neurology? And then I'll finish off, which I think is one of the most important parts of this talk, is just being yourself when navigating the academic career ladder. So those are the main topics that I'll be addressing today. And starting with exploring yourself, um, I wanted to just talk about kind of what creates my perspective, what points me towards the topics that I'm interested in, and kind of, I think that starts with exploring myself and exploring yourself in your path too. And that starts with my mom. My mom, it was a military wife and a homemaker. She was also an English major. She was she's very much interested in African history and ancestry, and a lot of that has kind of fallen upon myself too. I share a lot of similar interests to my mom. And so that's kind of the starting point. And I'm continuing this conversation just to expand on the fact that when you talk about my ancestry, it goes back to the South on the far right. Um, you know, four greats removed is my four greats removed grandmother. She was a daughter of slaves and a midwife for both black and white families. And this was my family primarily from Virginia, North Carolina on my mom's side. And then my three and two greats removed is the picture in the middle. And I included this main conversation that I had with my grandmother not too long ago. I was asking her about, what were her thoughts about Martin Luther King when she was younger, and she actually thought he was a troublemaker, which I thought was really interesting because our perspective of how we see him today, and it just kind of showed me that even the greats of the greats were human, and they went through their own challenges, and it wasn't like during their time they were just perfect like we learn about it in history and stuff. So then also another side of kind of exploring myself is also my dad, right? So I grew up a military brat. He was a combat veteran. And yeah, this is him in during his service. He was a staff sergeant. Um, and so it's really important as far as what forms my perspective in my research too, and even just as I practice as a physician as well, right? And so my dad is African Caribbean Latino. He's from Panama. He came to the US when he was 17 and then he joined the military. And my mom, like I said, she's African American. She's from the South. She grew up in Long Island. They met at SUNY Buffalo and married at 19 and 20 years old. Today, they're both teachers. And my dad's also a pastor at the Hispanic United Methodist Church. I think he just recently became a pastor at another church too, so he has Spanish speaking services and English speaking services as well. He works in the South Bronx as a teacher. My mom works in Queens as a teacher. So that's my family, that's where I come from, and that's kind of what shaped my perspective and how I move. All right. So now outside of just exploring yourself and understanding who you are as an individual by looking at your parents and your culture and how you grew up, also just understanding your experiences as you grew up too. um, and I promise all these things, it's gonna go towards being a researcher and your perspective as a scientist. I'm going somewhere, I really am. But you also want to understand your experiences too. So after my dad's retirement, we did face socioeconomic challenges. I grew up mostly in Jamaica, Queens, and I actually remember a really important incident that happened in my neighborhood with Sean Bell. I wrote about it in my college essay. The college admissions person actually wrote me back and said, I know you want to go into medicine, but, I hope you continue writing. And Sean Bell was a case where he was shot 50 times the day before his wedding. And it just really stuck with me. I remember at 16 years old. And so it was a really impactful experience for me. And I remember, many years later when the whole conversation come up around, George Floyd, just how much it just really made me feel like, wow, how much has changed since how many years have passed? And so that also influences my perspective because it's my lived experience, right? And so, um, but with all those different risk factors that come into play and kind of growing up, you're at this place now where now you're a neurologist, you're a practicing physician, you're a scientist, you're a researcher. And did you do it alone? Did you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? And the truth is, I didn't, right? So part of my experience and understanding my experience was that, you know, it started very early. There was a recruiter that came to our elementary school in Jamaica, Queens, that told us about the Math Science Institute. And this was a program that you can take throughout your middle school, and it would eventually prepare you for specialized high school exams. And specialized high schools in New York are institutions or high schools that are designed to basically um, attract students outside of who are restricted to certain zone schools, right? So if you grow up in a neighborhood where maybe your school district is not competitive, it allows you to go to get a high quality education. And so when I took the specialized high school exam, I went to Bronx High School of Science. And there, I remember I traveled an hour and 45 minutes every morning just to go to high school. And I remember I got up at like 4:45 in the morning because I wanted to be the first person in the shower, right? There was one bathroom between all of us, and it was a challenge, but I was excited. And even in high school, right, there was another program. One of my friends, she told me, she was like, "Do you want to do this, you know, college prep program?" And I did it, and it was great. It was SAT prep, it was college prep. You learn about financial aid, and even when I got into the University of Pennsylvania, and like I mentioned, my one of my essays for the University of Pennsylvania was about Sean Bell. And so even at that time, I was just being myself. I wasn't trying to be what I thought was the most popular or what I thought was the conversation of the day. And I think it's important to always keep that part of yourself as you move forward because I think people will see that. Um, so even at the University of Pennsylvania, I didn't do it by myself, right? There was another program called PenCap, and it was for low income undergraduate students. And there was a lot of different programs I actually did at Penn. There was the summer undergraduate mentored research program. There was the Botswana UPenn partnership. And all that led me to Meharry Medical College, right? So that was my experience. And looking back on my experience, I say, well, you know what? I didn't do this all alone. There was so many people involved in the process, that just cared. And there's no reward that you get for being a good person, right? You just do it. But as you know, underrepresented, underrepresented, underrepresentation in medicine and research, it's persistent throughout, right? So it's present at the med school level, it persists through residency. You see gaps in the workforce, in academia and research. And sometimes it can be challenging to navigate those spaces, but it's good to just have an understanding of kind of what to expect and kind of what you're kind of going through in general. And in understanding and kind of reflecting and looking back, I realize that these interventions tailored for underrepresented groups aren't handouts. They're opportunities to allow students to compete with other students who come from better funded school districts, have family members that are physicians, research, or have legacy, right? It's not that you are doing less work. It's actually you're doing double the work to get at the same place, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, right? And so now that you've kind of explored yourself and you said, okay, well, these are the experiences that I've go through. I have a better understanding of my perspective and kind of what I bring to the table. Now I want to know like what can I do to explore my passions, especially for brain health equity research. You've discovered that this is a topic that's really important for you and I think it's important to figure out exactly, where your passion lies, right? So in doing that, it comes with a better understanding of what brain health equity research is. And the idea is that you are investigating inequities associated with worse outcomes, right? So you do have to first identify like what are those worse outcomes and then you start to ask questions, well, why do those differences exist and why are there worse outcomes? And with brain health equity research, there is a focus on social determinants of health as well. You are looking to find ways, and you can explore other pathways too. Um, but thinking about how do I reduce the impact of poverty or the lack of education, poor nutrition, or even discrimination, right? And then when you're kind of exploring those ideas, you're also investigating, well, how can I create like supportive environments to help improve outcomes? And whether that be through improving access to healthcare or improving caregiver support in whatever context that may mean for you, for me, in dementia care, I work with a lot of caregivers as well. And also, you're looking to create tailored and culturally appropriate messaging for brain health education. So that's really, some of the goals that come with brain health equity research. And for me specifically, you know, I like to approach those concerns through community engagement mainly because it empowers communities to help solve problems that are disproportionately affecting them. And I think it does a twofold benefit, right? It is a collaborative approach. You are trying to get community members involved, organizations and researchers as well to just address health inequities in general. or brain health inequities, right? And like I said, in empowering the community, the idea is that you do want to foster some self-sufficiency. There's a term called parachute research, right? Where the idea is that this is mostly in the context when you think about high-income countries and low-income countries where you go in and you do your research, but then when all the funding and everything is done, you kind of there's no long-term viability in that, right? There is no mechanism to ensure that the community has the tools and the infrastructure to continue kind of the intervention that you were thinking. That can also happen, in the context of domestic communities as well as international communities. But the ideal is that you do want to give the community and the organization tools to adapt to changing environments and challenges, whether or not your presence is there, right? And then they can achieve goals and fulfill missions for um, they have that capability. And so this sounds like a lot, right? It sounds like, you're out there trying to save the world and it's a lot on one person's plate. But you start little by little. Um, you know, you're not gonna solve all the problems in one night, and you're definitely it may not be in a lifetime. But you can build your skills and your acumen to conduct high quality research, and that's the first step you can take. All right. So in doing that, when you're thinking about your career path and your training, you do want to think about first, what do you envision for yourself? And that can vary widely, right? When even at the beginning point of saying, you're building your skills and your acumen, um, you do want to think about how much training you will need to get to what you want to do. There are MDs who do a lot of research, and then there's MD PhDs who do a lot of clinical. You do have to decide for yourself, like, what do you see yourself doing? And that will determine also like how much skills you need to build from there. Right. So that's the first thing. In this pathway of building your skills and also thinking about your interests, you do want to just keep in mind there is agenda setting research in academic research. And this isn't to be discouraging, but it's just to also make you aware of what challenges you might face so that when you do face them, you continue to pursue the path you want to take and you are ready to think about, well, what are some of the solutions or alternative methods I can use to get to what I want to do, right? And you'll have internal academic interests, and then there will be external factors that you have to consider as well. I think what's very relevant now is the fact that there are national contexts that you have to consider. There are funding systems, and then there's career structures, and all that's going to shape knowledge production. But if you do build the skills that you need for research, um, you can learn to navigate that. So for me personally, for example, I did the Transcends program, which funded a master's in science and clinical research. And with that, I do have the skills to continue along my path. I'm would be lying to say I don't still have challenges, but at the same time, I can continue to pursue interests that I have because I do have some skills in research that I've built on, and it's an ongoing process, right? I'm still building my skills. Um, but just to kind of let you know the landscape and when you do brain health equity research, understand that there are national policies that set priorities, there's funding availability, and a lot of that is called agenda convergence. So like certain themes become more dominant just because they're fundable. For example, brain health equity right now, um, you know, it's going through some challenges when it comes to national policy priorities, right? And it's also important to know that, there when you're creating your research and career path, there will be career incentives around tenure, promotion, publication metrics, and that's also going to be influencing you as well. And then as an early career researcher too, you have supervisors and the need to publish quickly. So all those things are going to play a role. And you do have to think strategically about how you'll have to navigate that as well. And it's an ongoing process of just learning the landscape, right? So this is just learning about the system and the structure that you're having to navigate. Um, so like I said, there are going to be there's certain academic autonomy that you'll value, but there are also other things that you have to take into consideration as far as like the broader systems at play. So just to kind of summarize, when you're working with agenda setting, there is something to say about what knowledge is produced, which problems are studied, whose perspectives are prioritized, and which topics are neglected. And it is important to just acknowledge that, the truth and the reality is, for the most part, when you're underrepresented, you do tend to have an underrepresented perspective. And with that, you do have to build support and community around that, because it's not always going to be prioritized. It's not always going to be supported by everyone, and that's okay. That's not your goal at the end of the day, and I think it's important to just understand that for yourself too. But um, you have to define that for yourself as you move along in this process. So like I said before, some of the ways in which you can help to address these barriers for yourself is creating a path towards independence, working also, maybe you don't want to do full independence, maybe you just want to work with a team that's already kind of carving that pathway, and it's just, working with that team that's going to help you get there. I mentioned that I did the master's in science and clinical research, but there's many different ways in which you can obtain research training. Not everyone does a additional degree. There's mentored research, there's certificates, and sometimes people just take a couple of courses here or there. But however you navigate that path is also going to depend on where you are and kind of what your structure is as well, or what you see yourself doing in the long run. All right. And then also team building, leadership skills, that's other aspects to help address those barriers that you'll face too. All right. And just to kind of emphasize, no one gets through these barriers alone. No one gets to where they want to alone. It's a lot of collaboration, it's a lot of support, it's a lot of sponsorship. And the truth is, as much as there are people who maybe don't support your perspective, there's also a lot of people who do support your perspective. And I think it's important to keep that in mind too, because I think sometimes, especially if you're in medicine or if you're doing research, you're trained to see a problem and fix it and address that problem. But sometimes, in a real world setting, you don't only want to see the problems, you do also want to see what's going right. And sometimes I do feel like people miss the fact that, like, yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of things that are going well, and there's a lot of people behind you, but then, there might not be a lot of people who support you too, and that's okay. Um, and that's very important with brain health equity research, because I do think it is an underrepresented perspective and topic of research, and it can fluctuate as far as your support, right? And that you have to be okay with. So like I said, there are different ways in which you have to obtain collaboration, support, sponsorship, and there's macro levels, there's meso levels, there's micro levels, right? So examples of macro levels are like national policy systems, funding structures. Meso levels are like institutional priorities, departmental cultures. Micro levels are more like your career stage, your personal interests, your networks. So all those things kind of help in kind of pursuing, brain health equity research and community engaged research. They're just all necessary, right, to reach an end goal. You can't do it alone. All right. So now I'm going to talk about how you fuse your passion and skills in academic neurology. I kind of just talked a little bit about you've gone through the path of exploring yourself. You have a better understanding of what brain health equity research is and community engagement. And also you have some aspects of like what challenges you might face in academic neurology and how to build your skills. But now you want to fuse your passion, your skills. Maybe you've built yourself up to a certain level where now you're like, okay, well, now I'm have to think about how do I make this my interest? How do I make this a passion for me and continue with that resilience that I'll need to kind of continue along my path for brain health equity research and community engaged research. So that's what this is here. And at this point, I'll talk a little bit about what my path has been. So for me, I'm looking at psychosis and neurocognitive disorders among ethnoculturally diverse older persons. Like I said, I work primarily with um, patients diagnosed with neurodegenerative diseases. And with that, there are some patients who have features of psychosis. And as you know, with treating dementia, we generally, there is a black box warning that comes with antipsychotic management, right? So for these patients, there are worse outcomes that are associated with institutionalization. There's a high care burden, stress, and really it's even challenging for treating physicians. And there's a lot of coordination of care that's involved. And really my goal in starting along this pathway was um, looking to see if there's cross-cultural differences. And there were cross-cultural differences when I published this study. And now I'm at a place where I'm trying to investigate the predictors of disease variation and outcomes for Alzheimer's disease and features of psychosis in a clinical setting. So when I say real world setting, it's a clinical setting. And I'm doing that with community engaged research, comparative effective analysis, and clinical trials. Um, and the idea being that taking all these approaches together to kind of not just understand why there are these cross-cultural differences, but also think about what solutions we can come up with by collaborating with the community to determine how we can best improve outcomes so that we're not seeing these differences, right? Or we're at least improving the gap. Right. And informing and in thinking about my own research project and trying to incorporate aspects of community engagement research, also understanding, right, there's different ways in which you can involve the community. Eventually, I would like to be at a space where, my research and my projects can be one in which, um, there's a full participation in the development aspects of things. And actually, early on in these stages, they are the community. I am actually presenting to a lot of community boards to get their feedback on how best to develop the project and implement it and so on and so forth. So those are things that you start even at an early stage, right? And it's also to build trust and also ground my research in realities of these patient populations that I'm interested in studying, right? And at the same time, I'm engaging them. They're part of the participation process, and I think it is empowering for these communities to also have a hand in like how they can help kind of solve these issues, or sometimes we're not even aware that these inequities exist. So um, when we're working together, we become better effective at reducing inequities, right? So that's the goal. It's a co-learning process, building trust and relationships. That's the main thing, right? And like I said, the focus is on improving health outcomes, right? And so, um, in doing this, where I am in the research process is applied research, right? So there's different aspects of research that you can get involved with, right? Especially when it comes to brain health equity research and neurology, and also community engaged research, right? I think where I am specifically in applied research and clinical research, it's not necessarily basic research. So sometimes basic research, it does tend to be mostly driven by researchers. And also when you think about research associated with product development, like industry, that's different as well. Instead, I'm trying to think about tangible research ideas that would benefit society. And primarily for me, it's in a clinical setting, right? It doesn't have to be in a clinical setting, but applied research in general, I am collaborating with basic scientists to do like translational research, and also I can collaborate with industry as well to see, how can we best work with the community to solve these problems, and then I also get to, goes without saying, I get to work with the community as well. So basically being in this area of applied research, I can collaborate with a lot of different researchers and community and industry and stuff like that. All right, so now to kind of head towards um, kind of wrapping everything up. I think this is the most important point when navigating the um, career ladder for yourself, whether it be through academia, research, neurology. Um, it's just really being yourself when navigating it. There's many different ways that you can go up the career ladder. There's not just one way. And so to think whatever path you have to take, it comes with self-sacrifice is not accurate. But there are inherent conflicts that do exist between, what your individual needs are, what your individual wants are, your desires, and same thing with the community, what their wants are, what their desires, what their needs are, and then the academic research process, right? There's conflicts there. Um, and you can be transparent with the community about the structural challenges and the limitations of the academic research process. Um, and you can also implement strategies for making academic research process work better for communities too and help minimize conflict, right? But I think overall, the most important thing is that just kind of understanding that conflict is not a bad thing. Um, it's an opportunity to basically just identify what are the differences. Differences are okay, they're expected, um, part of being human. But you can find common beliefs and values. You can listen to stakeholders on both sides, and just learn what's important and then see if there's a common ground that you can meet and build that communication to highlight that common ground, right? So that's the goal there. So overall, power sharing, it is a dynamic process. That's something you very much do learn in community engagement. And it is going to vary over your academic career, your research career. Um, but a successful merging of culture requires awareness, intentionality, successful negotiation of power requires the willingness to an ability to engage in conflict resolution, whether that be on a micro level, a meso level, or a micro level, right? So national level, institutional level, individual level, right? So conflict isn't a bad thing, but you do want to learn how to negotiate through it and understand why there's a conflict, understand why there's differences there. Um, and overall, you will be shifting traditional research approaches by looking at brain health equity and community engaged research. But sharing decision-making power, it's doable. And yeah, and it's definitely something that you will experience. All right, so that is all. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac, for such an incredible talk. I really loved how you began talking about your personal experiences. I pictured you waking up at 5:30 to take that bus to high school. I loved that. And all the way to where you are right now. I think it's incredibly inspiring. So for our participants, feel free to place questions in the chat, and I could always ask those. But some questions came up that we can begin with. I really liked hearing about the different aspects of community engagement. Do you mind giving us some real world examples of the community engagement you took part in? You mentioned maybe speaking for some communities,
Yeah,
different events, but maybe how do you identify the group that you're going to work with and what are
yeah.
your interactions like?
Yeah. Well, so I started doing community engaged research in East Harlem, and I worked with a researcher there who is trained in community engaged research. And I was mentored by her for some time. And when I was developing my research project and interest, I presented a lot of my ideas and projects to her community science participatory board. Coming here to the University of Pittsburgh, I'm working with a completely different community, but very similar challenges as well. And so I started off with the community engagement office here. They told me about their community research advisory board that they have. And so I'm still working on research projects now, and I'm presenting to their community research advisory board actually next week. We also have a ADRC here, which is the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. They also have a community research advisory board, and I'm working probably more closely with them down the line as well. My primary mentor here is the director of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center.
That's great. Thank you so much. Edwin, are you able to ask your question?
Yes, good afternoon. Um, so I want to ask a question concerning the basic research and the applied
Mhm,
academic research.
mhm.
I want to ask about which of these type of research is most impactful.
Oh, that's a I feel like, there's you can't have one without the other. I would say it's more symbiotic than it is that one is more impactful than the other. I really think that a lot of the progress that we've made in just medicine and science in general, it can't be done without basic research. It really is the driver, and it takes many, many years that people are working on these things. And then once it kind of gets to the point where it can be applied, that's when you see some of the tangible. aspects of it, but I mean, that's the foundation of a lot of applied research, to be quite honest. But you also can't have basic research without applied research, right? You need um, to have a way in which you can translate that basic science into a more practical setting or applied setting. So really, they go hand in hand.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
Dr. Bruce.
Thanks so much, Estevana, for a fantastic presentation. Really learned a lot from that, and it really underscored the title of the series in terms of inspiration. So thank you. The question I have for you, you are a rising star. What would you see as an early mistake or early um, action or approach you've taken that in retrospect maybe you shouldn't have taken, and what did you learn from it that you could kindly share with us? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. I think that in navigating my career path early, I think that, just not understanding like unspoken dynamics and also like, coming from a space where I wasn't exposed to medicine and I don't really understand, what are those unspoken rules that are just socially understood. Um, I think I probably went in with a lot of not really understanding that. I was almost surprised when I felt like, oh, you don't care about this or this is wrong and I think it was maybe something where I felt passionate about it, but maybe other people didn't really understand where that passion came from, and it can be misinterpreted. And I think that led towards I think, a pathway where there was a lot of things happening that probably didn't need to happen, but it was, um, I think, how do I say this? Um, I think there was a lot of miscommunication and a lot of misunderstanding and on both sides. I think maybe I didn't understand what wasn't understood and they didn't understand me, and I think now I get that maybe communicating your ideas as clearly as possible um, is more important at the end of the day. And I don't even know if I even communicated that well.
But, but thank you for that. The broader point that I'm getting from what you're
Yeah,
saying, which resonates with me, is that if you are underrepresented in any environment or
yeah,
unfamiliar with the environment, there are
yeah,
always the rules that are spoken, and there are always the unwritten rules. And
yeah,
so, for your own advancement and knowledge and success in that environment that you're either underrepresented in or unfamiliar with, try and get to know about the unwritten or unspoken rules, because
yeah,
every area has them. And so
yeah,
try to get them, and to any extent that you can leverage them to your advantage. But every
yeah,
industry, every environment has them,
yeah,
and it can be very helpful. Yep.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. That's exactly it. Thank you.
Going off that conversation, you mentioned some mentors early on, and I just
Mhm.
wanted to hear a little bit more about what mentors stood out or other team members. I think you mentioned you really
Yeah.
couldn't do it without a full team. So, who stood out in this like early career period when you don't have as many resources as later
Yeah.
down the line?
There's so many, honestly, there's so many mentors. It's, I think now we've gotten to a space where like mentorship is like a hot topic. But um, before we formally identified people as mentors, there were just so many people involved in just caring to just make sure that you were informed about how to navigate certain pathways or how to get to what you want to do. And some of them were formally identified and some of them were informally there, right? And so I think it was just to kind of emphasize that, like, sometimes we can be focused on how much people aren't in support of you without realizing that you do have a lot of support. And I would say in my early career, it depends on how early you're thinking, but I'll start with like early career as far as neurology goes or neurology research goes, right? Um, I had, mentorships with the community engaged research. So Monica Rivera Mint, she was a mentor with community engaged research. There was Barbara Vickery, who also kind of allowed me to have some time early on in my career path to pursue research. There was Mary Sano, who's the director of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Mount Sinai, who is also just heavily involved in kind of like helping me like do research and publish. Um, there was mentorship that I got outside of neurology in the geriatrics department as well. There was all those different people involved as far as like the research pathway. Obviously, Bruce goes without saying simply because of the Transcends program and kind of having that formal research training with the Medical University of South Carolina and getting that degree. But then there were also like mentors at the Medical University of South Carolina while I was getting the degree too. So I think mentors come in many different forms. Um, and it constantly changes too as you get to, the next career path. I have mentors now still. Um, so it just really depends, but I think it's everyone who has a hand in kind of getting you to where you see yourself, and are truly invested in just kind of seeing yourself. I think, it is kind of, I think you do have to kind of balance like, um, your different, like, everyone has a goal and you have a goal. And I think even with mentors, it is a balance of like, maintaining your goals while also like understanding that your mentors have a goal. So that becomes a balance you also have to figure out as well.
And you mentioned some different institutions. How did you find, how was the process of starting at a new institution when you had built some of these, both mentorships, but also relationships with the community at a prior
Yeah.
institution? Do you feel like you were starting over or you could kind of use what you had learned?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, so I grew up in New York, but then also I did a lot of my young adult life in different states. I was for my education and training, I was in Nashville, Philadelphia. And so this wasn't my first time kind of leaving New York. Um, and also I grew up as a military brat, right? So my dad retired when I was young, so I did get to spend most of my life in one area, but prior to that, we still moved around a lot. And so I think for myself, moving around, have to be a little bit adaptable in changing environments. It's challenging, but I'm never like opposed to it. I do think when it comes to establishing relationships and community engaged research, um, it is kind of something you do have to consider once you kind of are have an established like community that you're working with and something like that. Um, for me, working with the East Harlem community, it wasn't easy to just get up and leave, but at the same time, there were also other things I had to take into consideration, both in my personal life and my career as well. So that's kind of, um, some of the things to take into consideration. But that being said, I do continue to want to work with similar populations. And at the same time, you know, there's need everywhere, right? It's not one area that is specifically facing challenges. I think those challenges, the truth of the matter is, are oftentimes shared by many different communities. And the ideal is that I would like to, work with a community long term to see things kind of pan out as far as creating solutions for those communities, but it takes time. Yeah.
And I think we're up to our last couple minutes of our webinar and our talk.
Hmm.
I think everyone would love to hear what your where you see your path the next couple years, research wise, career wise.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I continue to enjoy, community engaged research. I want to do community comparative effectiveness and research, clinical trials. I do continue to see that being a strong presence in my academic career. I want to continue to build the skills needed to produce high quality research. I don't think that ever really kind of goes away. It was a passion for me early on, and I see it continuing to have a presence in my career. I understand the national climate is going to change, and we're going to have some ups and downs, but I think it's okay. I expect this to be an ongoing process, and I don't expect to get anywhere sprinting. So I am fully prepared for the ride, and I'm excited. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. I think researchers are very resilient people,
Yeah.
and especially in this climate, I think
Yeah.
everyone feels very similarly that we'll just
Yeah.
keep going and see where we end up. But
Yeah.
thank you so much. That was such an inspirational
Yeah.
talk, and we really appreciate you joining us today.